Here we go. My name's Jimmy Dean. I'm an alcoholic. Where I'm from, we give a sobriety date. When I got sober, those old timers would say you give a date or people will think you don't have one. And so my sobriety date's August the 25th of 1997, and I'm thankful for that. Carl, I appreciate the invitation. He sent me a text earlier today. The text said, Covina Group of AA is anxiously awaiting your presence this evening at 5 o'clock your time. And you know, at first I thought, what a nice way to remind the guy that he's got a commitment. And then after I kind of thought about the verbiage in there, I mean, think about that, anxiously awaiting. I mean, you could take that in a good way or you could take that in a bad way. We are anxiously awaiting, as in we have absolutely no idea how much pain and suffering you might be able to cause in about 45 minutes. But I'm going to try not to do that. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be in the Zoom room. I don't know how long I've known Carl, and it has been, you know, we passed some weekend together. In fact, the last time was January. It seems like it was 100 years ago now, but, you know, it's an interesting opportunity. All of us cut from the same cloth, different places, different people, different times, but all cut from the same cloth. But what an opportunity, what a rare opportunity to be able to, you know, visit somebody's home group. You know, that home group's really where the work gets done. And you know, we might see each other in Philadelphia or Houston or, I don't know, Frog Snout, Arkansas, or wherever it happens to be. But you don't necessarily expect that you would ever visit that guy or gal's home group. And so this is really, it's been a rare treat. I've had it several times. It's a funny deal, right? So that we have the opportunity to gather together like this. So, you know, I'm excited to be in any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, but I'm especially excited to be here tonight. And they showed me enthusiasm and gratitude when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I believe that's palpable, whether we're physical or virtual or however it is that we find ourselves in a position to fulfill the fifth tradition. And if I ever doubted that the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous was resilient, that doubt ceased to exist in my experience mid-March. You know, your treasurer gave a beautiful announcement about self-support and what's behind self-support, and that we are able to continue to self-support. My home group's a speaker meeting on Wednesday night. We pass the Venmo basket as well and try to make sure we don't have many expenses right now because we're not physically meeting, but we try to make sure that we continue to support our intergroup office, certainly the general service office. And, you know, nobody cares about this job that I've got in AA right now, but I just want to tell you just a couple of minutes about office closed on the 20th of March. General service office shut down on the 20th of March. 95 people work at GSO, another 10 or 11 people at Grapevine. So you got a little over 100 people that are Tradition 8 workers. They're, you know, not all AA members, but they're all employed by Alcoholics Anonymous. And so we've answered 19,000 requests, emails, telephone calls, snail mail letters since the 20th of March. You know, the work of Alcoholics Anonymous goes on, just like it continues to go on in your own home group. We got a guy that's not alcoholic that's our mailroom supervisor. And so after COVID hit New York City, they figured out a way, because we still need to get snail mail, not just contributions that are going to come in the snail mail envelope, but you have to tell you, inmate writes a corrections desk, it's going to come in an envelope with a stamp on it. And Alcoholics Anonymous wants to make sure that nobody ever reaches out to AA without an answer. And so that guy puts on a hazmat suit twice a week and goes down to where box 459 lives and gets our mail, bundles of it. Then he brings it back to his little 3-room apartment upper part of Manhattan and lays it out in a separate room where it exists by itself, sprays Lysol all over it and leaves it alone for a day. And then that second day, he sorts that mail and wherever he can get to in all these individual general service offices, because each employee has had to set up teleworking. He gets that mail to the corrections desk and the CPC desk and the PI desk and the person who handles contributions and people who need to do this or that or the other thing. And that's how AA does its work. So we are resilient. You know, I've done a couple of PI things since March, April, since the zombie apocalypse, and I'm going to tell you, they wanted an opinion, and thank God we have a tradition that says we don't give one. But they also really thought that one of our A's was going to fall off when we couldn't meet in person. And I'm not sure what that misperception or miscommunication. I'm not sure where that was founded or how they were led in that direction. But I'm going to tell you, meetings just like this and people just like you, people are getting and staying sober. It may not be in person, and I will agree with you, without any extraordinary degree of empathy, I can tell you that I understand that I cannot wait until we are at a point where we can safely gather together to communicate the message. But in the interim, haven't we been quick on our feet? How phenomenal has this been? You know, it's just a short time ago, really just pre-COVID, my area assembly, and anytime it's general service, and I'm a general service guy, and I get it, we're always pole vaulting over mouse turds in general service, but I want to tell you, we talked for hours about whether or not my face could be on Zoom, right? Is that a violation of my personal anonymity at the public level, et cetera, et cetera? So I am so thankful that we left all the minutia out of the picture when we knew that we needed to make sure that when Alcoholics Anonymous was sought, it was found. And I'm thankful for that. I'm grateful and I'm thankful for that. And so I'm a Dallas boy. I was born and raised here. I would like to trade with the guy in Santa Barbara, though. That's a pretty awesome place. Just for maybe not permanently. My mother was a South Louisiana girl. She was a deep South girl. Sometimes, get on here and the twang goes and whatever. This is not a Southern accent. It really just is a Texas accent. And people from the South would tell you, it's horrible. The Texas accent is horrible. My mother was from the deepest of the deep South, Metairie. She's come to Dallas, go to school at SMU. And she's from an old family. I mean, old family, a couple of 100 years probably or more. And they thought she was certifiably insane to come to Texas for higher education. I mean, they couldn't believe she'd even think about doing that. What in the world would you do going west to try to learn something? They just didn't think you could do it. But she did. And the guy who's going to be my dad was on part-time faculty at Southern Methodist University 1 year. He wasn't an academician. He wasn't qualified to do any of that stuff, but he had advanced degrees in geology and some other related subjects. And little old SMU, they needed a geology professor, and basically he stood at the front of the classroom for a year. Maybe he took roll and gave a couple of assignments, but God forbid that anybody actually got a degree that was sitting in his class that year, I think. Boy met girl on SMU campus. I don't know anything about why my mother, an art history major, needed to be in a geology class. I can't tell you anything about that, but I will promise you she liked that professor pretty good. The reason I know that is I'm sitting here in the Zoom room with you tonight. So a year after she graduated, they engaged to be married. A year after that, they got married. And a year after that, they had me. I was their only child. We lived in a big old house at the head of a historic district here in Dallas, old turn of the century houses. And y'all got them all over different parts of California, I know. And you ever seen reruns of Munsters on television? You've seen that big old house, a big old brown brick house, had a green tile roof. And my mother stayed home. She was raising her family. It was just me. My dad had a company run. They shot seismic. He traveled all over the Southwest and sometimes even go over to California because they had all that geothermal activity in California. Places, miraculous places like Bakersfield, California, which is not Santa Barbara. And no offense if you're from Bakersfield, but it is not Santa Barbara. And he'd leave the house. I was 4 or 5 years old. We do this little thing called the going away game. 2 or 3 days later, my dad came back home. And I don't know what it was like in your house when you were a little boy or a little girl, but I can tell you in my house, my dad had been gone 3 days. It was 100 years. And he had a pattern. He had a project. I mean, there was a way that he re-entered his home. And we had 2 front doors on that big old house, but a front door, a little ante room, and another front door. And he'd slam the first front door as hard as he could. And he stood on a mark in the middle of those 2 doors and he'd holler, "Home, I'm home, I'm home." And he'd just bellow through that old tomb of a house. And I'd be upstairs in that playroom and man, it sounded like he was standing right next to me. And his plan was you responded, and he gave you, I don't know, minute 30 seconds to respond to his hollering. And if you didn't respond the time he allocated to you, he'd go back outside, slam the door harder, and yell louder. He wanted you to come. And I don't know what your house was like, but I can tell you my dad had been gone 100 years. I bounded down those stairs 2 at a time, and I'd grab him around his legs just as tight as I could possibly hold him. It seemed like he'd been gone forever, and I never wanted him to leave again. I always had a jacket. I don't know if it's because of the 60s. I don't know if it's because he was running a business. I don't know, but he always had a coat, and he always had a prize. He had a prize from the trip, and he'd say, Jimbo, reach in a pocket. Sometimes I'd have to get in that outside pocket to get that prize. Sometimes he'd make me climb up in his lap and get in this inside breast coat pocket, but I always found it. It'd be a Hot Wheels car, maybe a little flint rock. One time at Arrowhead from Alamogordo, New Mexico, he'd start spinning yarns about bluffs around Alamogordo, New Mexico, as he'd start talking more and more about the topography of the place where he had found this treasure. That Arrowhead get hot in my hand because I knew that Indian dropped it about 5 minutes before my daddy picked it up. I mean, he was a great storyteller. And so, as I said, my mother stayed at home, and she was the rule maker, right? She was the one who established the boundaries for acceptable behavior in our home. And she also policed the neighborhood. This was long before Crime Watch, but she had her Crime Watch of one. And this is mid to late 60s. There was a little bit of anarchy and unrest in the United States of America, and my mother was certainly not a fan of anarchy or unrest. And so we would cruise around Lakewood, which was our little neighborhood there by White Rock Lake, where that big old house was, and we would look for them. And back then, they were commonly called hippies. And in Dallas, Texas, there were places where they couldn't rent an apartment or a room back then. And so my mother would collect them. She'd promise them 3 good meals every day, and we shoved them in our garage apartment. They got room and board in our garage apartment. Sometimes there's 5 up there, sometimes there's 25 up there. Fascinating people, most fascinating people probably until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous that ever crossed my path. I couldn't wait to get home from that little Montessori school. We drive around the back of that house, and I'm going to tell you, it'd be 125 degrees in Dallas, Texas, in the middle of May or June, and they'd be circled around a fire. They were always burning something. And my mother would approach them and take her little tow-headed kid with her because she was going to try to convince them to come in the house for dinner so she could interrogate them and make sure if they were plotting anything that was subversive to the government of the United States, she'd be the first to know. And I remember those girls had straight hair. I mean, straight, long, straight hair. And I mean, just unbelievable how straight it was. Not a wave or a curl in it. And that wind would be blowing 30 or 40 miles an hour, and not a single one of those hairs would move. They wouldn't move, not an inch. And those guys had so much hair, you just couldn't even decide whether they animal, vegetable, or mineral. You just couldn't tell. And they just had these black buttons. I guess they were eyeballs, but these buttons had come out of all that hair. And every time they'd talk to you, their heads would bob. They'd go, "Hey, little man." And I just thought they were the most amazing people I had ever seen. And part of that rule following meant that when the 3 of us were together in that house at night, we ate dinner in a big old dining room. And I remember my dad and I used to make fun of that, right? So we'd have this linen tablecloth and all these plates and glasses and silverware nobody knew how to use. He'd look down at it like he didn't know how to figure it out. And I knew I didn't know how to figure it out. And we'd start laughing. My mother would get angry. And we played that record over and over and over again. It was a great home. And we did that till we didn't do it anymore. One day he'd been gone 3 days, comes home, slams the door, you come downstairs, you all get in the tomb of the dining room and have dinner together and laugh and cut up and this, that, and the other thing. The next day it's over. From the time I was 5 until I was 19, I never saw him again. Not a time, nothing. 19, I was a sophomore at SMU. I'd liked it so much. It was my second sophomore year at SMU, and I got a telephone call one afternoon. This young woman introduced herself and asked me if I was the Jimmy Dean that she was looking for. We have drinking careers in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd started mine at 15, and by the time I was 19, I was running around with some people who were trying to teach me how to have a good time. And there are rules for the way that you and I drink. And one of the rules that I learned early on was you never ever said yes, you were the person they were looking for until you found out why they were looking for you. And so we had a little interview process, a couple of 3 minutes, and I found out that she was the daughter of a woman my father had married. They'd lived within 4 or 5 miles of me all those years. She called me to tell me my father had a stroke and died, and she knew there had been a marriage before in another family, and she felt I ought to know. My mother was a single parent for about a year, and then one afternoon she used the word date. I didn't know anything about dates, whether it was human, inhuman. I mean, I was just a little 5-ish-year-old, 6-year-old kid. But I stood out there on La Vista Drive and I waited for it to show up. Here it comes. It was in a yellow Ford Fairlane 500 convertible. I don't mean taupe. I don't mean off-white. I'm talking yellow. Had double glass packs on the back of it. The date got out. It was human. 6'3", lamb chop sideburns, curly black hair, out on black shirt, black pants, black belt, black pointy-toed boots. Approached the porch of my house. I looked up at him, he looked down at me, and he got bored with that and held me sideways like UPS would bring a package to your front door, and knocked on my front door. My mother, he handed her a strange little package. They went off on a date that afternoon, that evening, and they dumped me off at his mother's house. And just to fast forward, I don't know, it took about a year, maybe 14 months. My mother was a devout Catholic, went to church every day. So that marriage sacrament was a big deal. Had that marriage annulled, and that big guy looked like Billy Jack. He married her and segued into the role of husband and father like he'd been doing it forever. Big man, gentle soul, kind, loving heart. And, we rocked along, and my stepdad was a stockbroker. He had an opportunity to make a whole bunch of money, he said. And so he came home, told us we were moving from Dallas, Texas to Lafayette, Louisiana. Now, Lafayette is called Cajun country. My mother was not a Cajun girl, but she was a girl from the deep South. So, it's funny. I was on a little Zoom thing, people in North Carolina, and they could kind of understand that fluctuation, variance in accents. You guys know, Northern California and Southern California, those people don't sound the same. And my mother could turn coffee into a 9-syllable word. She was a Southern girl. She was excited because she was going back to her people. Those women that she hung out with here in Dallas after she went to college up here, they'd say, my God, they'd hear her talk. Where are you from? And she'd say, I'm from Metairie, Louisiana. I only came up here to go to school at SMU. But she said, I never expected to spend my life in the North. And to my mother, Dallas, Texas is the North. And so here we go to Lafayette. And we lived on the New Iberia Road, kind of in town, kind of out of town. Big old house, a bunch of land around it. Everybody kind of lived in the country. I ran with a bunch of Cajun kids, went to a little parochial school. I was the only kid whose last name didn't end in O. There were Thibodeaux and Arsenaults and Flows and Moes, and there was a Dean. That was it. And we had a good year, a great year. At the end of that year, my grandmother, my stepdad's mom, she flew to Lafayette, bring me back to Dallas for the summer. And my mother got on the plane with me that morning when we were getting ready to come out of there. And she said, honey, you won't believe how quickly summer's going to pass, and we'll all be back together here in Lafayette. I'm going to send you postcards and call you just as often as I can. And she kissed me on the cheek, and we flew to Dallas. And the next morning I was upstairs in my grandmother's house, and I heard people talking, and her phone was ringing, and smelled breakfast. And I went downstairs to see what was going on. And there were 30 or 40 people in that living room that morning. And my grandmother looked at me and she said, honey, your mother's had an accident. We've got to go back to Lafayette. I remember thinking, what in the world is a big deal? So we grabbed some people and some clothes. We got on the next plane to Lafayette, and we go to the Our Lady of Lourdes Hospital, and they'd leave me in a waiting room in front of that hospital and go down the hallway and go in a room. You ever been in an old building built in the 30s or the 40s, especially something that's kind of a governmental building? You've seen those ceilings, and those ceilings have those square tiles, acoustic, with dots at the tiles. And I needed to pass the time, hours and hours, seemed like, by myself, and I'd count the dots in those tiles. And I'd get up to a certain number, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. I'd lose the number, look down the hallway, and somebody come out of my mother's hospital room, and I'd think, they're coming to get me. Because if I can hold her hand or whisper in her ear, I can fix it. I know I can. And, nobody talked. We did that, I don't know, 7 or 8 days. And then one afternoon, they sent a priest up that hall, and he sat down next to me and gave me a little prayer card and said, think good thoughts about your mother. And that's the way they let me know that she had passed away. Something or somebody had run her off the road right after she'd left me at the Lafayette airport. She didn't survive. Most God-fearing person I'd ever known, maybe up and through now. And I don't want to offend anybody by talking about organized religion in an AA meeting, because we are not a religious organization. We're a spiritual society. But I want you to know that my mother's cup was filled in her building. And she wanted to try the best of her ability to impart to her little boy how much joy she found in surrender power that was greater than her. And she tried to explain that and show me by the things that they were doing in her building. And you know, her eyes would sparkle when her newcomers would begin to catch on. And what I learned from that experience and the way that she died was, oh my God, don't ever get too close to that power. Don't ever let your guard down. That power will destroy you. And it'll destroy the lives of people around you that love you unconditionally. I watched it happen. We closed that house up as quick as we could, and we came back to Dallas. And I had a real father living, and he didn't make himself known. And my stepdad, we had a ranch south of Fort Worth, and he went down there, stayed on that place, and I moved in with his mother. My grandmother, he would call on the weekends. He'd talk to me for a few minutes, ask me how school was going, if I'd hooked up with my old friends, and we talked for a few minutes. I'd hang up the phone, and I think, he should be here with us because, he's my dad and I'm living with his mother. And my grandmother was the youngest of 9 children. There were 5 girls in that family, and they all lived ripe old ages. And I swear to God, those 5 girls talked to each other every day for probably 75 years. I'd eavesdrop on their conversations because I wanted to know what was happening. And she'd say, his heart's broken because she died so tragically. But we're going to leave him on that land. From the time he was a little boy, that land has always given him strength. If we leave him on that land, he's going to be okay. And that's what we did. And 11 months after my mother died, our house was full of people. And my grandmother cried so hard she couldn't talk. And my stepfather committed suicide in the living room of that ranch house, her only child. And I was angry. So we went through the process that's a normal process, and certainly that's awkward at best with that type of a situation. And people, human beings, try the best of their ability to convey sense of empathy and understanding. And to a man or woman, when they would leave her company, they'd say, God doesn't give you more than what you could handle. And even though I was 9 years old, I thought, idiots, they're all idiots. How in the world can they believe that? They're not going home with her at night. They're not going home to that big old house with every single light on and her laying in the living room floor crying herself to sleep. So I've spent 15 minutes in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, spending a lot of time talking about stuff happened long before I took my first drink, not so I can convince you that the circumstances of my life earned my seat in AA. I earned my seat. I earned my seat like you did. I drank too much and I drank too long. And as my grandmother would say, honey, I don't know why you do it so much. You're really not very good at it. I tried my best to be good at it and I just wasn't. But what I want to talk to you about is I have absolutely no reconciliation with anyone who is happy and joyous and relatively free in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous without surrender to some power, any power that is greater than themselves. And I was adamantly opposed to that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was a 32-year-old man with the childish influence of a little boy, had certainly not grown up probably in so much as physically, but certainly not spiritually or emotionally when I came to AA. And so now as good a time as any, before I get drunk, sober up real quick, to tell you that I was brought into Alcoholics Anonymous, just like people are being brought into Alcoholics Anonymous in the virtual environment today. How do we do that? We don't expect the meeting to be the message. The meeting is how we can show groups of people, not individually, but collectively, that we agree that the first 164 pages of our book are a prescription for a guy like me, recovery from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. I will agree with that 1,000%. But they brought me into AA. How do I bring in the guy that's now got 39 days of continuous sobriety? I don't sponsor the guy, but he was handed to me by an old timer from Fort Worth on his very first day of sobriety. I bring that guy into AA. I make sure that the men that I sponsor reach out to that guy. And you know what happens with that? The men that I sponsor get better. I make sure that they know that they need to find out how he's doing, where he's doing, why he's doing what he's doing. And that's a wonderful thing. And that's what they did for me when I finally got here. Now, I had a real father that was living and he was not known. I had that stepfather's mother, but not blood related to me, and she stepped up or stepped down and said, I love this boy, and I loved his mother, and obviously my son loved them both. And she gave me tools for living, and she taught me right from wrong. And I learned about a sense of community and altruism and trying to be of service to my fellow man. I learned all of that when I was growing up. Now I've done a lot of TDC work. TDC doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this, but I've sponsored some guys who will never be free world AA members. I've not met one single person who was a true sociopath since I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've not met a single man who was raised by wolves since I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I will tell you that we all have what Peg Martin used to talk about, the lizard part of the brain that talks to us about what we are supposed to do for our other fellow human beings. I mean, I would just say the bare minimum. You know, it's an interesting deal, right? There are a couple of things that are just as powerful as anything else to talk about the disease of alcoholism to a guy like me, not about depth charts and flow charts and all that other stuff they taught me in those repeat offender classes for DWI in Texas. But a woman will stand behind a podium in Alcoholics Anonymous and tell me that she would take a drink during the period of time that she was pregnant. I understand that. I reconcile it and I understand it. And what that means is that drinking will override the lizard part of the brain, because the lizard part of the brain tells that woman above all else she has to protect what's growing inside her, but alcoholism is stronger than that. And I can tell you that every single waking moment during the course of my upbringing, I was told that I was supposed to look outwardly rather than inwardly, that I had resources and I needed to share my resources with whoever I thought might be less fortunate than I was. And I can tell you, for years before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the lizard part of my brain had been overridden by the disease of alcoholism. And there is no way in the world that I could put any limit on what you would do or needed to do for me, but I put all sorts of limits on what I was willing to do for you. So I was 15, a freshman at Woodrow Wilson High School in Dallas, Texas, and I had these two friends. They were identical twins. We were a triumvirate of nerds roaming the halls. Woodrow Wilson High School, you probably didn't have anybody that nerdy that is allowed to live in Southern California, but they're here. They're over here. The only thing I didn't have was horn rim glasses and pocket protector, but other than that, it was pretty bad. And so we went to a senior beer bust, a place called White Rock Lake, which had been a reservoir for the city about 100 years before. And I don't know what you did, freshman nerds, at senior beer bust out there, but I can tell you here we hid and we watched them have it. And at the end of the evening, I had 2 cups of hot foam from a tapped out keg at the hill at White Rock Lake. And that's where I met the first senior leader of the pack, who said, if you will do what is necessary and you will share your resources with us, we will teach you how to have a good time. And I was ready to go. And the 3 things you needed in Texas in 1978, when you were underage, you had to be 18 to drink legally here then. You could go down on a road called Greenville Avenue in the middle of Dallas, Texas, and if you paid $50, nice little old lady made you 18. And the second thing you needed was a hardship driver's license, which you could get here, and all they did was put a little sticky tape on the back with a restriction, and I'd been driving at the ranch, and I took the test, and I passed. The third thing I needed was a vehicle with a license. So I went home and threw a fit. I was good at throwing fits. Had a brand new Firebird, had 14 miles on it when I drove it off the lot. And the older I get, I wish instead of tearing that car up, which is exactly what we did within the next couple of years, that I'd put it up on blocks and it could have been my retirement. What fool that I am. I can't even imagine. I don't know where we're going, but I'm ready to go. So junior girl sees the car in the parking lot the next morning, finds me in the hallway at school and says, pick me up at 7 o'clock. And she took me to a place called Papagayo Disco on Greenville Avenue. And oh my God, height of the disco era, there are a few squares that I think might be old enough to remember what all of that looked like. I'm gonna tell you, we were petrified when we got in there. I was 15, she was barely 17. They had trays of amaretto sour circulating around that bar. I grabbed a drink like everybody else grabbed a drink. And I don't know if it was in the middle or the tail end of the second one, it happened. And shouldn't that really be root and branch of every talk that's ever made in AA? Dr. Bob said anything over 15 minutes was all about ego anyway, but I can tell you it happened, and every drunk in the squares knows exactly what I mean. I found something that could make tomorrow be a million years away, and there's lots of time I need tomorrow to be a million years away. I found something to let me repaint yesterday and make yesterday look exactly the way that I always wanted it to look. Where had that been? Did I cross some magic invisible line? I have absolutely no idea. But I like what one of our fellow AA members from Southern California shares frequently. You know, those drinks were probably $2 a pop that night, but I paid a lot more than that, didn't I? Paid with bits and pieces of my character. I paid with just a little bit of those principles that I'd already been given, tools for living, the positive tools for living. I had absolutely no idea and wouldn't know for years and years. So obviously brownout, blackout, pass out, get sick, and you could tell that story 10,000 more times. You know, I graduated from school, went down the road to SMU. I had Ivy League acceptance letters. I didn't even think about going that far away from home. Looked like they were a little too serious about the curriculum rather than what you did after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I finally got out 5 years with a degree in international business and French, and it's just down the road from my house today. And I can tell you, I still don't drive through that campus because I know they're going to figure out they made a mistake and they're going to take that degree back. I got a job at a little software company for beer money. Found out I could drink with adults as well as smaller people. And I can tell you all the experiences in a nutshell were just disastrous most of the time. Now, I didn't always go to the hospital. I didn't always go to jail. I didn't always say something that completely destroyed a long-standing friendship, but oftentimes I did. And sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's the middle of the afternoon. Because you see, I have to have half a fifth of vodka before I meet you for lunch. And then I have these blips. They're blackouts in Alcoholics Anonymous, but back then I just called them blip. They were just odd blips. And we can tell about the duration and the intensity of the blip based on what your face looks like when I come out of it. And so that's how I get arrested, and that's how I get DWIs and have wrecks and go to the hospital, abrasions, contusions, trying to hang pictures, I break my arm, right? Trying to change a flat tire, I break my ankle. I have a fight with an iron coffee table in my house about a year before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was knee walking drunk and I was already broken and battered beyond recognition. And I slammed into an iron coffee table and fought it for about 15 minutes. And it just waylaid me. And I laid there and bled for 2 or 3 hours. When I got up, I thought I couldn't see out of my left eye. I figured I'd punctured my eyeball on the corner of that coffee table. So in my world, if you put out your eye, you need a drink. And I went to get one. Swung by the bathroom, take a look at my face and see how bad off I am. And this is as good as it got for me before I came to AA. I hadn't knocked my eyeball out the corner of that coffee table like I originally thought. I just split my head open so bad up here that my flap had fallen, this flap had fallen down over my eye. So I just held the two pieces of my eye together and just slapped a big piece of duct tape on there and went on about my business, went on with my life. Now, you got to be drunk beyond belief to put duct tape on a wound needed about 20 stitches. But you got to be wasted to get that duct tape off. I'm just going to tell you that right now. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous one eyebrow. So through a series of events and a second DWI, I found my way to you. I was not interested in what Alcoholics Anonymous had to offer. I will promise you that. I was in an outpatient treatment facility the very first day, is Memorial Day of 1997, which is not my sobriety date. And, they marched us like lemmings right before 6 o'clock to what we would call a discussion meeting here in AA in Dallas. And there were 60 or 70 people in that meeting. It was a big meeting for here. I don't know what they discussed. I find it interesting, and I've taken a little informal straw poll. It's just my own straw poll, but, we workshop things to death in AA. Again, another part of general service. We talk about service in the home group and sponsorship and things that are certainly vital components of the recovery program. But we spend a lot of time talking about that, and I've seen people just break down at a microphone to talk about, please don't bring a 10th tradition or the 11th step. If there's somebody in the first 60 and 90 days of sobriety in the room, change the topic, change the substance. And so I thought, you know what, maybe I'm wrong about my position on that. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to start asking the people that I know they're sober 35, 40, 45, 50 years. I'm going to say, what do you remember about your first 5 AA meetings? And to a man or woman, here's what my straw poll has offered me for experience. They don't remember anything about topic or people shared stuff that pulled the paint off the walls, none of that stuff. What they remember is the second time they showed up, somebody remembered their name and said hello and asked them how they were doing. What they remember is the first time they went to the AA meeting, it was 1 o'clock in the afternoon after a noon meeting, and they said, you know, we're going to go get a sandwich. We'd like nothing better if you'd come along with us and have a sandwich with us. And they didn't ask whether you had money for lunch or didn't have money for lunch or any of that other kind of stuff. They made sure the check just never got my way. People remember stuff like that. They remember being invited to brunch or dinner or dinner or breakfast or pie or coffee. They remember, like I remember, I fell in with getting the car people. I didn't know they were not getting in the car people when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And my sponsor would say, be ready at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I said, where are we going? And he'd say, Norman, Oklahoma. And I'd say, my God, it's 250 miles away. Why in the world would we drive up there? He said, it's their group anniversary. We're going to go to their group anniversary in Norman, Oklahoma. I thought they were certifiably insane. Couldn't believe it. I should have known why those people were having to buy 2 sets of tires a year. Because they couldn't stay home, could not stay home. So my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I accepted the silver chip with commitment 24 hours of sobriety in my part of the AA world. And the only reason I got the chip so everybody would shut up. And I had a bottle of Tanqueray gin. It was hot, but it was unopened in the front seat of my car. My God, I'd been in a treatment center since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I needed to drink. But it was a meeting house that I found myself in. No slight to them. They're comfortable with that. And so 2 minutes after 7, as soon as that meeting closed, everybody left. But one guy held back. He had 6 months of sobriety. 6 months seemed like 1,000 years. I had been drinking alcoholically at that point 17 years. About to go to state jail for 2 years for revocation of probation. Still in that little software company. I got in that job at 20, so I'd been there 13 years. 2 or 3 days a week, I struggle in by 10:30 or 11 o'clock in the morning, try to sneak down that hallway to get into my office, make sure the lights are out, the phone's off the hook, and the trash can is conveniently placed for that foam bile that's going to start coming up in about 10 or 15 minutes. And as I'd walk down that hallway, those people that had known me all of those years, they'd get up and they'd shut their doors because they wanted to let me know how disgusted they were that there wasn't anybody in that company that had enough guts to fire me. That grandmother sacrificed a large portion of her life to raise me, give me all those principles and tools for living, and certainly bought me everything I ever wanted or needed. I hadn't been welcome in her home for probably a year, maybe 2, before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. You see, she was afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of me because I stole her stuff. She was afraid of me because I kept stealing her peace of mind. She was tired of it. I'm the guy that gets bonded out of jail and goes to her house, 30 years old. She hides my keys. I don't like it when you hide my keys. So, I get up and start tearing up your stuff. She says, if you get out of this house with those keys, you're going to kill yourself or somebody else, and I can't let that happen. And I rip the telephone out of the wall and tell her I'll strangle her with the cord if she doesn't give me my car keys. That's what came to AA. And that's what was greeted by that guy with 6 months of sobriety when he shook my hand in that meeting that night. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, welcome to AA. My name is Drew. He gave me his telephone number. He tried his best to get mine. I wasn't having any of that. But he said, if you'll be at this exact same meeting tomorrow night, I'll be here too. He made a commitment, got me to try the best of my ability to form my words around one as well. Our interchange probably took all of 2, possibly 3 minutes. And every sober alcoholic in the squares will understand when I tell you that he saved my life. He saved my life. He never was my sponsor. He had got to a certain point in the steps over all these 20 plus years, and he hits the reset button. He starts over again. But I want to tell you, his godsend to the new man. I left my first AA meeting with no book, no newcomer packet, no meeting schedule. Message I had tremendous depth and weight. I had a handshake from a guy who'd been sober for 6 months. I had a telephone number that I could use in case of emergency, and I had something to look forward to in the next 24 hours. Oh my God. I had absolutely no idea what I'd been given that night. I bumped along, drunk, middle of June. They sent me out to a group in North Dallas. No group any better or worse than any other group, but they studied the book out there on Thursday night. And that's where I met my first sponsor. He sat across a picnic table from me, and he spent about an hour, hour and a half telling a little bit of his story and get me to tell some of mine. When he talked about Alcoholics Anonymous, his eyes would light up. When he talked about how newcomers began to form some semblance of sobriety and start taking sober actions and exhibit sober behavior, and I looked at the sparkle in his eyes, and I was a 32-year-old man, and he transported me back when I was a little 8-year-old boy. And I thought my mother got excited about that. My mother got excited like that. It intrigued me. And you know, good sponsor, member of a home group, they'll talk about you behind your back in a good way. What did Dr. Bob say? Let's guard that erring member, the tongue, and if we use it, let's use it with tolerance and kindliness. And he did. He got me a commitment in that group, and that's unusual. Now, in Southern California, I don't think so much. At least people that I know, and all of California, really, and other parts of the world, it's not hard to hold a commitment in a home group or in a meeting. But most of our places are storefront places. They look like Alano clubs to you guys, and it's hard, right? Some of these group inventories I've done over the years, I said the best thing y'all could do is mess those chairs up in the morning so the noon people have something to do. And but he got me a commitment. At the church where they had that book study, I put the signs out on Thursday night. I put those signs out in the yard in front of that church so you knew that Alcoholics Anonymous was meeting inside, and they had framed the window shades. They each weighed about 40 pounds. They were in these enormous frames. So I slugged those steps and traditions into the room and put them up on big, huge easels. And it doesn't take long to learn a little bit about how things work in AA. I found out in short order by mistake, and then I did it on purpose, that if I swapped the steps and the traditions and I put them in the opposite places in the room, I could watch my very own version of a contentious group conscience meeting. I mean, old time sobriety would just lose their mind, like that we were all just going to implode because the steps were in the tradition slot and the traditions were in the step slot. I mean, I watched all that happen, and I drank, right? I got that commitment that night, and I got drunk the next day. And so, you know, the conscience of that group was, if you lost your sobriety, you lost your commitment. That's not a surprise. And people know common welfare comes first. And they knew that too. But I can tell you, I'd show up Thursday, I'll put those signs out sober. And so what happened was 5 members of the steering committee, and they rotated every week. I put the signs out in the yard. They preserved my dignity even when I didn't have any. And they'd come out with me and they'd say, Jimmy, we understand you lost your sobriety. We're going to have to relieve you of your commitment. Then it'd take them about 10 or 15 seconds. They turn around, they give the commitment back. Because that sponsor said, I don't know what's going on, but the only tenuous connection he has to what's going on here is the fact that he shows up sober on Thursday to put out these signs. They saw stuff that I didn't see. Isn't that funny? So I've been around Alcoholics Anonymous. The summer of '97, I was around AA. And I'm going to tell you, I much prefer being in it than being around it. I also know there's a fundamental difference between saying you're in Alcoholics Anonymous or that you're going to Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are two completely different. And so on the night of the 24th of August, I had been exposed enough to surrender to powers greater than themselves through the actions and the attitudes and the ideas that those sober AA members had been exhibiting to me, not what they'd shared in meetings, but what they were doing in what I call pavement time. That sponsor insisted that I go and have a hamburger with you, and I sat across the table and I listened to your story, not the one from the podium, but the one that you could really tell eyeball to eyeball. And I said, there is no way in the world that he or she got here from there on their own. So I was just at a point where the first step had been worked, but the second step was an arduous process, right? But thank goodness, physical sobriety steps work a lot better when we're sober. And so I surrendered on the night of the 24th of August, something I didn't know or see or feel or believe in. What does the book say? Flimsy read. It was such a flimsy read. But I trusted that sponsor. I believed in what he was showing me to do. And when I got up and made the telephone call on the morning of the 25th, I was willing to accept his direction. He didn't stand between me and a drink, never has. I've had 2 sponsors since I've been sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. That first sponsor retired from Alcoholics Anonymous my second year and subsequently came back. He never took a drink, but he got every bit as crazy as he had been when he was brand new. But either one of those guys, they've been strong guys, and they've been guys that certainly were not afraid to give you direction. But I've never had a finger in my chest, not one single time, but I've had a lot of arms around my shoulder. So I need to wrap up. It's 5 till, and I wanted to tell you one thing real quick about how lives can change, how my life changed. So there was a piece of direction early on I wasn't willing to follow. I struggled with. He said, you call that grandmother on Sunday and you ask her how she's doing, and you keep calling her on Sunday until she tells you to quit calling her. And I went home on a Thursday night and pondered that direction, and I prayed about that direction, and I thought, this is something I will not, cannot do. And I prayed about it on Friday, and I prayed about it on Saturday. And remember, I've got a tenuous connection at best to any power, and certainly not bringing any kind of trust. I mean, I am brand new, just days in the program. And nobody will know. You see, that's the caveat, right? Nobody will know. If I don't make the call, I'll just lie about it. I've been doing that all my life. But there was something that said, you know, you owe that guy. And that's not right. And I don't know where that little voice came from, because that was a little voice that I never had. And I made that call that first Sunday morning, and I'm going to tell you that call was short. That call was so short, and it was tough. And I hung up that telephone, and I had to call that sponsor, and I said, she hates me. This is never going to work. And he said, you keep calling her. Did she tell you not to call her? And I said, no. And he said, you call her next Sunday. You just keep calling. I was sober about 100 days. It was about 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning. I got her on the telephone, and she said, I'm going to make some tuna salad today. And since you were a little bitty boy, you've always loved my tuna salad. If you can be at my house within 30 minutes, I'll make you a sandwich. And I want you to know I ran red lights in the city of Dallas, Texas, so I could get down there to her house in the window of time she'd allocated to me. And I sat in her breakfast room, and I was quiet as a mouse. If she said something, I said, yes, ma'am, or no, ma'am, and nothing else. And I ate a tuna fish sandwich, took about 20 minutes, and my life changed. My life changed. And I knew what you were telling me was true. I knew what you were showing me to do was exactly the way that God wanted me to go. And so I am thankful and I'm grateful, and I hope I didn't eat up the almost after meeting time. And Carl, thank you again for the invitation. Thank you.